What is going on, guys? Nick here, back with another video. After a couple of crazy years and record-breaking profits, Moderna and Pfizer are probably the most relevant biotech companies on the globe. Now, I've had a lot of people ask me to take a look at both Moderna and Pfizer, but I thought an even better question to ask is if you could only buy one, which one is the better buy? So let's take a look at what's going on with Moderna first. So Moderna is actually a much newer company. Originally named mRNA Therapeutics in 2010, the company was created to research stem cells, specifically around RNA-medicated immune activation. The findings built on previous research and would lead to the technology that would be licensed and used by both Moderna and Pfizer to develop the COVID vaccines. The company later switched its name to Moderna Inc. and increased its focus towards vaccine development using mRNA technology. But Moderna was struggling to have any vaccine breakthroughs. They promoted its Crigler-Najjar syndrome vaccine, that was tough, as it was entering human trials in 2016. But the treatment was delayed after it failed to prove it was safe enough to test in humans, which led Moderna to indefinitely delay the project and focus on a few less lucrative vaccines. But that changed on January 7th, 2020. Just 7 weeks later, on February 25th, Moderna shipped its experimental vaccine to NIH to conduct its first trial. Now, mRNA vaccines are actually a pretty big deal. The way vaccines have typically worked is this. Viruses contain a core of genes made of DNA or RNA with an outer shell made of proteins. Messenger RNA, or mRNA, makes a specific structure unique to that virus called a spike protein, which is what your immune system will be trained to look for. Some traditional vaccines have used weakened viruses, while others have just used part of that outer shell or spike protein. The idea behind mRNA vaccines is if we know what the spike protein looks like, can we use that to simplify the vaccine production process? Because it's very easy to make huge amounts of mRNA in laboratories very quickly. In the past, vaccines have needed a lot of animal cells infected with weakened or dead viruses. For example, yellow fever vaccines were grown in huge amounts of chicken eggs that would take somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks to generate enough material to start vaccine production. And once the process is underway, each growth and production cycle usually takes about a week. However, using mRNA vaccines, all of that could be synthesized in just a few minutes. Now, I've seen a lot of consideration about mRNA vaccines in the future, specifically if it could be used to replace existing vaccine production. But right now, it seems like that's not very likely. While mRNA technology will continue to be used on new diseases, there's a few big reasons why traditional vaccine production won't be replaced by RNA vaccines in the near future. The first reason is vaccine technology is generally driven by safety and efficacy, not by manufacturing efficiency, meaning for mRNA vaccines to replace an existing vaccine, it would have to go through all the clinical trials and slow testing process just to save a little manufacturing time. The second reason is vaccine manufacturers around the world are already effectively set up to produce traditional vaccines effectively at an affordable price. Why overhaul the yellow fever vaccine production when mRNA yellow fever vaccine won't give us much of an improvement? The third factor is cost. mRNA vaccines require new and expensive technology for manufacturing and distribution. The mRNA vaccines have to be kept at extremely cold temperatures, which can be very difficult to manage in poorer countries. Now, Pfizer is a much bigger and well-established company. They were founded in 1849 by two German immigrants, and most of the revenue is generated from manufacturing and selling pharmaceutical products. They currently have several drugs that generate more than $1 billion in revenue each year.
Prevnar 13 may help provide additional protection.
But the biggest change is their successful COVID-19 vaccination. It was actually the first to get emergency use authorization from the FDA. Pfizer's vaccine was recently approved for children ages 5 to 11, and by early 2022, they expect the data to be ready for children 2 months to 2 years old. This is actually a huge market because children are about 25% of the world's population. Now, Pfizer has seemed to lead Moderna in approvals, but after looking into it, it seems like the reason is Moderna has been much slower to submit data for FDA review. Now, I could get into a lot of the details about which one's performing better, how many boosters are going to be needed, but there's so much information out there that seems to change. It's hard for me without a background in this stuff to feel confident that I can tell you what is the most accurate news. So what I personally expect is that boosters are coming. I'm not sure if we're going to need another booster beyond the third one. However, I did hear the other day that there's a potential for a fourth shot for severely immunocompromised individuals. Okay, so to get a clear picture of how both Moderna and Pfizer are doing, let's take a look at the financials. Starting with Moderna's revenue and net income, we can basically see they didn't produce anything until 2021 when their COVID vaccination hit the market. In 2022, they reported $800 million in revenue and $750 million in losses. And over the last year, that's jumped to $7 billion in revenue and $3.5 billion in profits. This is kind of what we would expect for a company that didn't have any real products until their COVID vaccination. Now, Pfizer's revenue and net income are much different. While they're consistently profitable, they're really up and down year to year, and it's hard to really figure out any consistent trend going on. To be honest, I was really expecting a much smoother chart here than what I see. So looking at the revenue versus expenses, we can see that Moderna spent the majority of its money on research and development, which isn't very shocking here. What is pretty interesting though is that they actually didn't report any cost of revenue charges until the past year, since they really had no sales. Pfizer's business is actually completely different. They reported about half of their expenses are from the cost of revenue, while about a third of their expenses come from research and development. So typically here I'd show you guys the different segments and the revenue and costs for each, but Moderna really only has one relevant segment, which is their product sales, mostly made up of their COVID vaccination, and Pfizer doesn't break themselves down by segment. However, this chart shows revenue for each of Pfizer's biggest products compared with the estimates for their 2021 COVID vaccine revenue. They currently expect about $33 billion for all of the 2021 2.1 billion doses they'll deliver. Their biggest drug, Prevnar, only brings in about $6 billion in revenue. Okay, so let's take a look at each company's current forecasts. So Moderna is currently forecasted to earn about $20 billion in revenue by the end of the year, and they expect to earn that same amount in 2022. But the current expectation is for that to decline, and for them to only take in about $10 billion in revenue by 2023. Moderna's revenue isn't exactly pretty. While they showed a huge amount of growth from 2020 going forward, that projection is obviously expected to come down pretty quickly. Net income growth for Moderna shows, again, another pretty ugly picture. Pfizer, on the other hand, is projected a pretty similar surge, and then flattening over the next 2 years, with the revenues projected to come down to just over slightly above 2019 numbers. Revenue growth is projected to fall for each year after 2021 by 14%, but looking at net income growth, that fall is more slight at only 7%. Okay, so now that we have an idea of how each company's performing, let's take a look at what they're worth. So Moderna is actually a pretty tough business to value with a really wide range of potential outcomes. It's possible they could go back to having almost no valuable products post-COVID. It's also possible that the world could catch on to the incredible power of mRNA vaccines and find new applications that had not previously been considered. Realistically, I think for a low-end valuation, this company could be worth minus 5% growth, and for the top-end estimate, I think about 10% growth seems reasonable. Now, a growth rate of minus 5% comes out to a fair PE value of 5, and for the top-end estimate, 10% growth, that comes out to a fair PE of 22. Looking at Moderna's valuation charted out, the current forecasts see 2021 and 2022 having a huge value surge, bringing the stock's top-end value up to the mid-600s and the bottom-end value around 150. But the current track for 2023 shows that even the most optimistic valuations puts the current share price above the company's post-pandemic value, making this a pretty expensive stock. Now, Pfizer is a little easier to value since they do have other drugs beyond their COVID vaccine. I think since this company wasn't showing any growth before COVID, a growth rate of 0% for the bottom end number is fair, and for the top end, let's use 5%. That puts Pfizer's fair PE value between 8 for the bottom end number and 14 for the top end number. Now, when we look at Pfizer's valuation on a chart, we can see that their current share price touches the fair value midpoint by the end of 2021, but their valuation will fall slowly over the next couple of years as their COVID revenues decline. The current share price is closer to the top end of the valuation by 2023. So I don't own any Pfizer or Moderna stock, and I don't necessarily plan to buy any anytime soon. If you had to ask me which one's the better deal, I would say that it's Pfizer because they have the most guaranteed revenue and profits post-COVID. But this doesn't mean that Moderna couldn't license out its mRNA technology in the future for some novel use. This is kind of what I expect from Moderna going forward. I can't say that I'd be against taking a small position on Moderna just to see what happens, but I definitely wouldn't make this a large chunk of my portfolio. Now, if you guys check out this corner right here, I have a really great video for you guys next. Don't forget to hit the like button before you leave, and as always, thanks for watching.